All right, so what we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to build some things like light switches and things like that. I think I'm going to this evening build like a pull chain. So like a pull chain light bulb kind of thing. So I've got a new document here. I'm just going to start messing around with it. Just building some stuff out. So we got our layer 1 here. I mean, usually when I start doing stuff like this, I go ahead and just, start messing around. So in terms of a light switch, I definitely need something into the ceiling. So let's go ahead and turn on our rulers here so that I can pull out some basic guides. And all I really need is one guide for the ceiling, I'm thinking right now, because I want to make this as a reusable asset. And if you haven't messed with Animate in a while, there is an assets panel now, which allows you to save your creations as specific assets in order to, preserve them for later on, or, perhaps distribute them to other people, things like that. So what I'm going to do is create this kind of pull switch for a light bulb. And yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. First thing I'm going to do is just kind of reset my color swatches here to black and white and choose the rectangle tool. And let's pull out a basic base for our light switch. One of the things I really like about Adobe Animate is the ability to go ahead and manipulate vectors in specific ways. So it seems my cat is coming downstairs. So that's always fun. Cat is always welcome in my studio. Let's go ahead and just center this to the stage. So make sure you choose align to stage if you do want to center anything to the stage. And there we go. Hey, Poe, what's up? How you doing? All right. Poe seems pretty happy tonight. And there's the beginnings of our light switch. And what we're going to do is sort of have the light bulb. There's a couple of different types of ways of having a pull chain light switch, right? So there's the kind where it's just hanging by the actual electric cables, which I find pretty unsafe. So I'm going to make mine actually mounted to the ceiling. And that's what this base is that I'm starting to create here. Let's go in about 200%. And my guides aren't exactly there. So there we go. I'm going to switch the guides in place of actually switching out any of my assets. And from here, I can choose my sub-selection tool and just choose any of these little anchor points here. Before I do that, I do want to go ahead and change my snap options. Okay, I've got that already pretty set. Everything's snapping nicely, so perhaps I don't have to mess with that too much. Yeah, it's working real good. So I'm going to pull these over. Till there's something like that. And Again, I'm a pretty big fan of using guides for different things. They help me keep things exactly like I would want them. So we're going to go ahead and make sure these guides are on point here. And there are some differences. So let's go in a little bit more just to make sure everything's going okay. And of course, sometimes it helps to have things align properly. So this is at 230 right here. And let's keep this at 260, 410, 380. I just want to keep the guides really in line with what we're trying to do. All right. And I meant to create this as a drawing object, but it didn't actually happen. So what I'm going to do is select that and create a drawing object out of it. And let's add to that base right here. And because I have my snapping on, everything's snapping to the grid here, which is pretty nice. And this needs to be a drawing object as well. All right. So anybody in the chat, feel free to chat away. And I do have the chat open here, so I'll be able to see anything that, any questions that come in, any comments, anything like that, as it happens. We're going to need to add a bit of dimension to this. So the best way to do that is, of course, to use something like a linear gradient for something like this. So I'm going to choose the basic black and white linear gradient here, but I am going to make some adjustments to it. So let's go ahead and go into my colors here. And I don't want it to go straight white to black. I want it to be different shades of gray. And maybe even a little bit yellowed, right? So you know how like plastic and things like that, tends to yellow over time. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. So we've got this really nice gradient, just going from a lighter yellow to a darker one. I'm going to quickly add that to my swatches so that I can reuse it. So now if I pop into this guy here, we want to apply that as well. And here it is. All right. So this is the base of our light bulb here. The bulb's going to be inserted into this, and it's going to hang from this. So let's go ahead now at this point. And since the base has been created, we can actually rename this layer to base. And lock it down. And create a new layer that's actually, I'm going to put below that, and that's going to hold the bulb itself. All right. So I got my base. To create the bulb, I'm going to use, first of all, the oval tool. And for fill, I want to change this to something that's kind of yellow. And let's pull this down. like 30% opacity. And for stroke, we don't really need any stroke for this. Oops. And of course, we can always use the align panel to align that to the stage exactly like we want it. And using the sub selection tool, we can make this look more like an actual light bulb. Just take those handles and work them. Just like that. I'm going to go ahead and reposition this light bulb up into my, I don't know what you call it. It's like a light mount, a light harness, something of that nature. And, you know, most light bulbs actually have that filament inside. So there's like 2 wires and a little filament in between. At least the traditional light bulb types have that kind of thing. Of course, LEDs and things like that do not. But I am going to go ahead and create that for my light bulb. So let's go ahead and do that. Should be pretty simple to do. I can use my line tool. I'll just use a gray color here. 1 pixel, that's fine. And I'm just pulling these out kind of freehand. And at this point, we can use something like the pencil tool. There we go. To create the actual filament in between there. Now, that color is not exactly what I'm looking for. So if I double click to select the entire stroke, I can of course adjust that however I like. Yeah, that's not very good either. Sometimes things take a little bit of time to get correct, right? That looks okay. Just playing around with the colors here. That's not right either. All right, so there's the basics when it comes in terms of the light bulb itself. And it's mounted inside of this ceiling mounted bracket here. So the next piece we need to actually draw out is the pull chain. So for that, I'm going to go all the way back out to 100%. And we actually don't need these guides anymore. So let's go ahead and dismiss those. So view. We're going to hide our guides. And we're going to create a basic pull chain. Best way to do that is just to create a line. So here is our line. And, you know, I've seen a number of pull chains on light bulbs. Like some of them are just a basic string or a twine. And then others are actually like those little chains that are made up of, there's like little beads, like a beaded chain. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of for this, is to just have a sort of beaded chain for that. Let's go ahead and lock down our bulb layer and create a new layer called chain. And the chain is, of course, going to exist inside of this layer. And I'll pull it down from right here. Let's put that behind the bulb so it looks like it's back there. And, I'm going to want to use some sort of, maybe kind of like, what am I thinking? Like a pattern type brush on this particular stroke. So bringing that stroke size up to, say, 5. And then going in, let's open up the brush library. And we're going to go to pattern brushes. And here we're going to look for something that might work for a pull chain. So something like this is like, you might have to create your own pull chain pattern brush, which you can do inside of Animate. Or you might want to choose something else. So, I don't know, this dashed circle might work. So let's go ahead and double click on that to apply it. It's now applied to my style. And with a style of 5, let's see how that looks. Not terrible. That's actually not too bad. So if we zoom in a little bit more, we've got our little pull chain here. And that looks okay. It's close enough to a pull chain. If I wanted to, I could create my own pattern from this, or you can always edit your stroke style here. And, you can change these different things. Hey, Ryan. I see that you have commented. It's going very well, thanks. So, as mentioned before, you can also create your own, patterns inside of Animate if you want to. And these are going to allow you to create things that just aren't available through the normal libraries. Because Animate comes with all sorts of different stuff. You can see there's a giant brush library with arrows, artistic brushes, decorative brushes, and even inside of there, there's a bunch of different categories. It's very similar to Adobe Illustrator if you're not used to it. And you've also got these pattern brushes, which is what we've used here. They're meant to be repetition, right? So you've got all these little circles. It's a pattern. It's a repetition. That's how it works. So usually you don't see a black chain. I'm going to change the color of this. That gray is not going to work because obviously it's blended in completely with our background. For this, let's go ahead and change the stage background a little bit. Let's go with something a little more colorful, but not that colorful. Sometimes you just have to go into the color picker and find exactly what you're looking for. That's pretty good. What objects so far? So I'm basically building out a light bulb. So a ceiling mounted light bulb with a pull chain. And we got a couple layers going on here. We got the base layer, which is this fellow here. Then we've got our bulb, which is the bulb itself with the filament and the wires. Then we've got our chain. So once we get this, and actually I think that color that I chose is going to work really well with this. So that's perfect. But once we actually get all of these things together, we can start thinking about animating this thing and creating an actual reusable asset out of this inside of Animate that we can distribute through. Well, if it was a horror movie light bulb, it would be like it wouldn't be mounted to the ceiling, right? You'd actually have a you know, just be hanging by the actual electrical wires so it could swing freely and kind of freak people out, right? Yeah. So one thing, so let's go ahead and just move all these guys. I'm going to select all these and just shift them up here. Oops. Of course, I have these locked. I can't move anything if things are locked. I'm just going to shift them up just to give me my ceiling without having to create anything else that could get in the way, right? All right. So let's go back to like 200%. And this is a good length for the pull chain, I think. Yeah, that's a pretty good length. So now what I want to do, I just want to create a little something at the bottom of the pull chain that's going to let us pull it. So usually at the end of a pull chain for a light bulb like this, you've got something that's like a, gosh, I don't even know what the terminology is for it. It's like something you can grip, right? So your hand doesn't just go and the chain goes out. So let's go ahead and put that grip in there. And for that, I'm going to just use the rectangle tool again. And I just want a nice solid style for my stroke. Stroke itself, I don't care for. Let's just have a fill. That's going to be the exact same color. And by the way, this is something I really like and appreciate about Adobe Animate, is that whenever you're inside of the color picker, the color swatches, any sort of color type windows, you've always got the eyedropper tool that just kind of like appears out of nowhere. Because of course you want to sample from other things inside of here. And with Animate, I mean, it's all vector based, right? So I like to just create like really simple shapes at first, and then go ahead and just kind of tweak those using the different tools. So let's go ahead and zoom in even more. Oops. And from here, I can select any of these little anchor points. And create my little handle. And I can also go through here and make adjustments to these. So I can pull out these little handles and once they're exposed, hitting an Alt or Option is going to let me just tweak these individually. So I can just shift these just like in Illustrator, right? This is going to allow me to have complete control over what I'm doing right here. All right, so that's pretty good. I think at this point, we've got all of the different pieces that we want for our light bulb. And of course, if we wanted to, we could go ahead and create this as an actual asset and distribute it to people to use as they would want. But this is Adobe Animate, so we probably want to animate this stuff, right? So actually having the chain pull and the light bulb turn on is what we're going for here before we actually create an asset out of it. So let's go ahead and do that. In this case, how far, I'm wondering, does our little pull string go? Because we do want it to have a little bit of give when we go through here, and it's not that much right now. So let's go ahead and pull that up a little more. And just to give us that little bit of extra tug that we're going to need. That's going to work. Okay. All right. So we've got our assets. We now need to go ahead and start planning out our actual animated sequences here. Let me check here. So we got a couple people watching. So welcome everyone who is here live. If you do have any questions or any comments, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And I'm keeping an eye on that as I go through this. And what we're doing is building out some common everyday objects inside of Adobe Animate. That's the goal for today. Or this evening, rather, because it is night, right? So let's go ahead and think about how we're going to do this. So the bulb needs to light. That's probably the number one thing. The chain needs to pull down, and it probably needs to swing a little bit after it's released. Probably the easiest thing is just to turn the light bulb on or off. So let's go ahead and add some frames to our timeline and figure out what the timing is for this sort of thing. So I'm going to go to the 2-second marker here. The actual document properties that I have for this particular project. I'm going to change the height to match the width here, so it's a complete square. And maybe a little bit differently. Let's see. I don't know. It's probably okay. Let's go 500 in height. And 500 in width. And this is probably something you should do like straight off, right? This isn't something that you should do when you're first getting into it. Or you could goof stuff up pretty easily, especially if you haven't used Animate very much. It is something that can get away from you if you're not careful. All right. So one thing I'm definitely going to do is start thinking about creating objects out of these things. So right now I've got my base, I've got my bulb and my chain. So here I've just locked down the bulb and the chain layers. And then using the selection tool, I'm going to select the vectors that make up my base object here. And they're already drawing objects, which is pretty good, but I want to store them in my library as an actual base object. So let's go ahead and with those two pieces of the base selected, we'll choose Modify, Convert to Symbol, and let's create a graphic symbol out of these. And we'll simply name them Base. I'm going to put the registration point at the very top center because that makes sense in this case. So now you can see in the library, we have our base graphic symbol. There we go. I can lock that down now. And the next thing is going to be our bulb. We've got a couple of components to the bulb here. Yeah, so After Effects, I mean, Animate has the concept of keyframes and easing and stuff like that. There's something that's sort of like the graph editor in After Effects in terms of the motion tween editor. But it is a little different to animate between the two programs. They do complement each other in some ways. You can pull an FLA or a Animate authoring document directly into After Effects and do some further compositing on it. And it actually brings in every one of the layers you create very nicely inside of an After Effects composition. And I'm already out of water. We're only like 30 minutes in here. That's not good. All right. So I am going to select all the components of my light bulb, which includes the glass itself, the enclosure. It includes the wires, and it includes the curled filament. And again, modify, convert to symbol. I'm going to create another graphics. Well, yeah, let's create a graphic symbol out of it. So there's three symbol types inside of it. Animate. There's graphic symbols, there's button symbols, and there's movie clip symbols, and they each have their own like particular properties and timeline variables and things like that to them. For instance, a button symbol is only going to ever have 4 frames. A movie clip symbol can run completely independent of its embedded timeline or its parent timeline. A graphic symbol has the ability to do some additional things like, you can choose the specific frames that appear at specific times. You can have them loop in a certain way. Graphic symbols are more used by animators. Movie clip symbols more by people who do dynamic animation or programmatic animation. And button symbols are used by people who want buttons, right? So if I choose graphic symbol here, that's probably going to give me what I want. You can actually override any of the designations you make to these things inside the properties panel, no matter what. So it's not something that you're really stuck with when you first create the symbol. You can always change it. So I'm going to initially create this as a graphic symbol and just call it bulb. And align to the top center, that's fine again. And you can see these things change, as we convert them to symbols. This is a graphic symbol now. An instance of bulb, and inside of my library panel, I've got my base and I got my bulb. So these are discrete items I can use. And if I want, I can create, many instances of my bulb here if I really want to, and so forth. So it's easy to go ahead and replicate these things once you've created them as symbols inside of your library. All right, let's go into the chain and just create that pull chain. And the pull chain itself is like, I'm trying to think of how I want to do this, because I'm going to do the pull chain differently. The pull chain, I'm going to actually try to use some inverse kinematics animation on that and see how that works. It might fail. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's okay. So let's see. I guess, I mean, I think the first thing to do is probably actually to do that. Let's go ahead and create an inverse kinematics structure, an IK structure of bones onto this specific item here, which right now is just a series of shapes, right? It's a path, a shape path. It's got a style attributed to it and so forth. Inside of my properties panel here, I'm going to look for my bone tool, and I don't see the bone tool. So I am going to go into my edit toolbar, which is the 3 little dots here, the ellipse. And sure enough, there's my bone tool right there. So I can pull that out and place it wherever I want. I'm going to put it near my asset warp tool right here, which looks like a push pin. And all right. So with the bone tool chosen, let's zero in a little bit on this because it is a bit thin. I can go ahead and create some bones here across my actual string. So what I'm going to do is make some longer ones up top. And they're going to get smaller and shorter as we go down the string here. What happened? I'm not sure what my bones are doing here, why it's not letting me do that. There we go. Sometimes you have to be really precise with some of these tools in order to get them to work correctly. There we go. So now I have an IK structure inside of my pull chain. What that's going to do is allow me to create physical animation inside of that pull chain. So let's go ahead and actually add in some additional frames here. Now notice down in the timeline, if you'd never worked with IK before inside of Animate or anything else, Animate especially, you'll notice that our chain layer is now empty. There's actually nothing in there any longer. And that is because we've gone ahead and created that IK armature. And that shows up as an additional layer here. Armature 1. We can, of course, rename this. So I'm going to delete my chain layer. And just rename that Armature 1 layer back to chain. All right. So we're looking pretty good here. I have good feelings about our light bulb. So let's start animating it. I'm going to go out to the 2-second marker here. And again, if you're not familiar with Animate and how the timeline works, what we basically have is in our document properties an FPS setting. So this is frames per second. And right now I've got the frames per second set at 30. So it's pretty good. It's going to create some smooth animation for us. You could bump that up to 60 if you wanted to. You could pull it down to 12 or 14 and it's going to be a little janky, right? 30, 24, those are all good parameters to stay within for the FPS setting. So let's go ahead. Let's go. Yeah, I've got a real affinity for this light bulb right now. So we're gonna stick with 30, and of course, 2 seconds of animation at 30 frames per second is going to be 60 frames. So when you deal with Animate, you're dealing with a frames-based timeline. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag across all 3 layers at frame 60. And then up here, I've got my keyframe controls. And I just want to insert frames up to that 2 second mark. And there we go. Now I've got my playhead, which is the blue item here. And I can scrub this back and forth to do anything I might want. For some reason, for some really strange reason, the little pull chain has relocated itself to the middle of my actual chain here. So that's kind of odd. Let's go ahead and move him back down. Oh, gosh. And this is the point where you're like, oh no, what's happened, right? Obviously, something has gone terribly wrong. So you do a Command or Control Z to see if you can get back to the spot where everything was right. Oh, you're kidding me. Look at that. So it's really weird. Our little IK armature is still there, and you can see how cool it is, right? So this would have been so neat to see actually in action. But for whatever reason, Animate decided to just to remove all our visual assets to that. So what we've got is an armature without any visuals, which kind of isn't what we want at all. So let's see what we can do here. Yeah, sometimes some of these tools just don't behave themselves like they're supposed to, you know? I mean, it's the perfect armature for what we're trying to do. Look at that thing. But I think I'm going to have to delete it because it is not what we want. Let's see what happens if I kind of copy and paste this thing. No, ain't happening. Okay. And of course, this is one of the things that you just have to deal with when you're working in software like this, is you just have to be like, all right, well, that didn't quite work out like I expected it to, but we can figure it out as we go along. So let's go ahead and make the light bulb turn on first, and then we'll deal with the pull string. So going back out to the 2 second mark like we did before, we're going to go ahead and insert frames. There we go. And let's have the actual light bulb turn on at the 1 second mark, which is 30 frames here. So the base is going to stay locked. We don't really care about the base that much. It's just meant to be a visual reference for the light bulb itself and the pull chain. So inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and insert a keyframe. So insert keyframe. This is going to allow me to make a change in properties. So here I've got a keyframe set at frame 1, and every layer is going to have some sort of a keyframe set at frame 1, no matter what. Subsequent keyframes can be set manually, and they contain some sort of change in properties. So for this one here, you'll notice that over in the properties area here, and I created this as a graphic symbol, but I'm going to override this actually. I'm going to override this into a movie clip symbol. And the reason I'm going to do that is because with a movie clip symbol, something we get is the ability to add filters to our objects. And just to be consistent, let's go ahead and change the instance on that initial keyframe into a movie clip symbol as well. And at frame 1, I want that light bulb to turn on. So it's going to show light. We're going to have a glow to that. So inside of our filters right here for our object. Now, this is something else you have to keep in mind as you're working through any Animate project, is that in your properties panel with the release of Animate 2020 and forward, you have the properties panel broken up into 4 specific things. You got your tool, object, frame, and document properties. And you can easily switch between any of these as you're going through and working through a project. So right now I want to deal with my object properties. And for that, I want to look at filters. I want to add a filter to my object. And that filter I want to add is going to be a glow filter. So I'm going to choose glow. And you can see initially we've got a glow filter of this red-orange color, which is not what I want. I want something that looks more like natural light. So something like this very light yellow color here. And I can lock the blur X and Y and pull those out. Increase the strength. And always increase the quality. So this quality setting goes back to like Macromedia Studio MX days, or Studio 8, I think is when these sorts of things were actually first introduced into the product. And it defaults to quality low. And the reason it does that is because low is, of course, less intensive on the web. You're not going to be dealing with this stuff on the web generally. I'm actually targeting what's known as ActionScript 3.0 in here. Although I am going to be producing just like an animated GIF or an HD video or something like that. I'm not actually producing this for any specific runtime. So it doesn't really matter what I choose here, because video is video, GIFs are GIFs. They're not rendering this stuff on the fly. It's already pre-rendered. So let's go ahead and switch that over to medium. You can see we got some banding here, but it's not so bad. And if I choose high, it looks a little bit different. Maybe I'll go medium. Again, pull up the strength a bit. Yeah, I don't know. It looks a little weird. You can always stack filters as well. So something like a gradient glow might work a little better. You could also do something like a drop shadow, and then have that shadow, instead of being black, be more akin to a glow. And let's hide the initial glow here so we can focus on the drop shadow. It's a lot more subtle, that's for sure. But it might be actually pretty good to change the coloring of that. And then just enable our glow. And just sort of work that out. All right, so let's save that. And what we've got basically, let's go in 200%. So there's our glow, and there's no glow. So we've got basically on and off for these lights. And I don't know, I think that looks pretty good in terms of like something being on or off. You can definitely tell the difference there as we go through this particular asset. We skip around the timeline, right? So here we can have this nice strobe effect. All right. So let's see. Pull chain, right? So my pull chain got all kind of IK goofed. So let's go ahead and fix that. Maybe we can't be so elaborate with our pull chain, or perhaps we need to, create the chain as one object and the little pull fixture as a separate object. Maybe I'll try something like that this time, see how it works out. So there's our little string once again. I'm going to adjust its position here. And if I recall, stroke size was about 3 last time. Maybe I won't quite bother with the pattern brush. And also, let's select this and go to Modify, Shape. And I want to convert this line to a fill. So now we're dealing with an actual fill instead of a stroke. And at this point, we can zoom in once again. And, something that is likely to be helpful when you're dealing with IK and creating bones is to actually turn off any snapping. So I'm going to go into my view menu here, turn my snapping completely off. There it goes. So now, Animate is going to try to snap to my grid or snap to other objects or anything like that. It's just going to be happy with wherever I place these bones. So this could help. Let's actually zoom into 300% again. There we go. Now I can start pulling these bones down. And of course, the more bones that you place inside of a object like this, the more flexibility that object is going to have. There we go. Rename that to chain. All right. That's pretty good. So before I create any sort of a pull for this chain, I want to make sure that the chain can actually animate properly. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is, and you can see here, you might have noticed before that the background color of all the frames inside of my chain layer here, they're all green. And this indicates that it's an IK armature that's in here. So I'm dealing with inverse kinematics, and I'm dealing with poses. So poses are basically keyframes. You can see one right here. And if you're used to using Adobe Illustrator or Adobe After Effects, you'll notice, a little diamond right here instead of the normal circle that we've been dealing with when it comes to keyframes. And whenever you're dealing with motion tweens or IK animations inside of Animate, they're going to use this kind of keyframe that's designated by the little diamond instead of a circle. So let's go ahead and we want to pull at some point. I'm going to say maybe around 20 frames here. Let's go ahead and right click. We're going to insert a pose. Now this is only available if you're dealing with IK animations and inverse kinematic layers using the bone tool. If you're doing shape tweens, classic tweens, motion tweens, the poses are not usable inside of those. So here we have our pose. So it's going to be the same from here to here. And then we want to actually have something happen. We want to pull down and then have it sort of like swing back a little bit. So let's go ahead and insert another pose right here. And in this pose, we are going to pull down. So I'm going to pull to the side. I'm also going to shift down on my keyboard quite a bit. And there's our animation right there. Now, after I pull it down, I want it to go back up pretty quickly and then swing a little bit. So let's go over here. I'm going to select the object again, pull it back up, and have it swing. Until it's pretty close to stationary. All right. And of course, let's go ahead and turn on our onion skinning. And we'll be able to loop this as well. Just so we can get a feel for it here. And I'm not going to do onion skinning right now, but I might have to. Okay. I like that little dangle at the end there. So it pulls down, and you know what? When it pulls down, that's when the light bulb should come on. So I'm going to shift this keyframe over. Pull down. Actually, right there. Right there. Pull down. Ding. Light bulb goes on. Release. And it dangles. And there it is. Okay. Let's just see the whole thing in a loop here. So I like that dangle at the end. That's really nice. But I do want this to change a little bit. So I want to insert a number of additional frames here. And let's go ahead and insert frames. About that many. Okay, cool. And another thing, usually, so one thing I didn't do is I didn't hold, because usually you yank the chain, right? And then just you hold it for like a fraction of a second and then release. Yes. So hello, I see your comments, Sheridan. Yes, I am in Colorado. I am in the, I'm between Denver and Boulder. So north of Denver, south east of Boulder. So these guys, I'm going to shift all of these over. Just a little bit. And here, I want to copy that pose. And I just want it to hold for a moment. So I'm going to paste that pose right there. I'm also going to insert a bunch of frames towards the end here. Let's take it up to 3 seconds. I'm going to extend my loop range markers and let's have a look. What happened? Gosh. So all my little keyframes just died. This is the saddest thing about using the bone tool, I swear. Let's go to my history panel. And there we go. There's my dangle back. I am not going to lose that dangle. All right. So whatever the Animate team is doing with the bone tool, I hope they fix whatever that bug is that kind of destroys my keyframes, because that's not good. I need my little dangle right there. That's what makes this so much fun. Right on. There we go. All right. So this is pretty much a completed light bulb now. So I've got my bulb and he goes through and does that. You know, one thing I will need to do is if anybody is going to reuse this, I need to mask out this layer. So let's go ahead and lock down the chain layer, and I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. And let's go ahead and mask out that chain at the top. I'm going to call this chain mask. Yes, I am an AEL, and thank you for your welcome, Sheridan. I appreciate it. So where are you in Colorado? Are you generally central, southern Colorado? Are you in the mountains? So for my mask here, I am going to, so this is something that I do all the time. And I always feel like I need to explain it, is whenever I create a mask inside of Animate, I always use this one color, which is this like, just like radiant green color. And actually, I should change my view options back on here. Let's change my snapping back on, because I do want this to snap. I only turn that off for my IK, my inverse kinematics stuff. So there we go. Then if I right click on here, I can create a mask. My chain automatically gets nested within there. Oops. No, I don't want to do anything with that. And now I don't have that little chain poking up out of the top of my light bulb into the ceiling, right? So pretty good. Yeah. Colorado Springs. I've barely ever gone down to Colorado Springs. I've made the drive a couple times, maybe like 3 times. And I'm generally, you know, in the Denver area, Boulder area. So it's quite a drive. But there's some neat stuff down there. Neat stuff along the way too. And gosh, it's been a long time since I've been even like close to driving to Colorado Springs. I mean, that was like when I first moved out here. And that was... I was going to say 10 years ago, but it's more like 20 years ago. So, yeah. All right, with my mask in place. Pretty nice. Okay. I am fairly pleased with it. And now what we need to do is finish this up by creating an asset. So I mentioned earlier that there is this new assets panel that you can use to store assets across your documents. So whereas the library panel has different assets that you use within a specific document, the assets panel can be used across multiple documents. And you can create your little assets that you can distribute on different networks and everything. They're just little files. They're ANA files, I believe. So Adobe Animate, they're Animate asset files. So let's go ahead and turn this into one. Yes. Colorado's like such a big state. I'm originally from Massachusetts. And, in Massachusetts, you can drive to Maine, you can drive to Rhode Island, to Connecticut, to like Vermont, New Hampshire, like all these different places in like an hour or less. And then you get to Colorado. And if you're in the center of Colorado, it takes you hours and hours to even leave the state. It's huge. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and copy my frames. So selecting all these different frames. If I choose to copy, or layers rather, if I choose to copy layers, it's going to copy the layers with all the frames intact. And then I can go into my library and add a new symbol. Call this light bulb. And yeah, sure, graphic symbol works. Hit OK. So this brings us into an empty symbol named light bulb. We can see up here, it's named light bulb. It's a graphic symbol and it's completely empty. So down in our layers, let's go ahead and right click and we're going to paste in those layers that I just copied. There we go. There's our little light bulb there. So with that pasted in there, it now appears inside of our library, of course. And I can go back out to my main timeline. And if I want to, I can just make that completely invisible, or I can delete those layers or whatever. If I create a new layer, I can pull in an instance of light bulb and it's basically ready to go, right? However, I do want to make this an asset. So to make this an asset, what I'm going to do is inside of my library, I'm going to right click and choose Export Asset. Here I can give the asset a name. Light bulb's going to work. You can give keywords if you want to. I generally haven't done that yet. This is such a new feature that, a lot of people don't even know it exists yet. But if you had a ton of assets in your asset panel, of course, you would probably want to tag them or have a search capability or something like that in order to find them better. So I'm going to go ahead and hit export. In here, I can choose my downloads. And sure enough, there's an ANA export here. So if I export this as an ANA file, there it goes. And now, here are my ready to use assets. These are the ones that come with Adobe Animate when you install it. But I can go ahead and click on this little options menu here and choose import. And sure enough, in my downloads, here's a little package for me. And it's an ANA file called lightbulb.ana. So I can hit open. And there we go. Now I've got a light bulb that I can use wherever I want. And if I go ahead and choose File New, for example, and let's go ahead and make something for the web. I'm going to do an HTML5 canvas document for the web here. Hit create. Now I can just drag that light bulb over. Now, before I do that though, notice that inside of my library for this file I just created, there's nothing, because the libraries are tied directly to documents and projects. But once I drag my asset in here, and I can reposition that, then I've got my light bulb graphic symbol right there. I can, of course, change my document properties so that it's not glaring white. So I can make that like gray or whatever I might want. And there we go. Now I can distribute this asset wherever I want. Of course, because I'm using HTML5 canvas, you know, some things are not exactly supported. So quality, knockout, and inner glow of the glow filter is not supported in Canvas. And same thing with drop shadow, but that should be okay. So what I can do now as a graphic symbol, if I go into looping here with the object selected, I can use my frame picker to pick exactly which frame I want to have appear anywhere. So here's where the light actually turns on and so forth. Or I can just extend my frames. I know this is a 3-second animation because I just built it. So let's extend the frames there. And then if I hit play, there we go. Now I've got a light bulb for HTML5 canvas. And I can test movie. I don't know why it's not turning on. The light is being pulled. Little pull switch here. But something that is pretty foolproof. If we go through, we can always create this as an animated GIF or as an HD video. So, yeah. So Colorado, I've been in Colorado for about 20 years. Yep. So if we go here, File, Export, we can always export an animated GIF file from here. But there's actually a pretty cool feature that's new inside of Animate 2020, which is located right here, the Quick Share and Publish option. So I'm going to do a quick social share. And at this time, the only social network you can choose is Twitter. However, as noticed here, there are more social sharing channels coming soon. Gives me a little preview. And I can give it a description if I want to. So, gosh, what should I call it? I made a light bulb. Perfect. Then hashtag with made with Animate. Let's go ahead and share that. So with Animate, there's all sorts of different target platforms that you can use. So you can do video, but you can also do, of course, animated GIF. You can do, as we saw, HTML5 canvas, which has a number of limitations, but you can do VR platforms. So if you're interested in virtual reality, you can do stuff like that inside of Animate. You can use WebGL. You can also publish games and apps to Apple iOS for iPhone and iPad. For Google Android, you can create desktop utilities, all sorts of different stuff. And you can just do little animations too, like this. So whenever you publish, it brings up the Adobe Media Encoder, which if you're used to Premiere Pro or After Effects or anything like that, you'll probably be pretty familiar with Adobe Media Encoder. Sometimes it takes a few moments to actually process this thing. Sometimes many, many moments. You can see it's doing something because I've got that little waiting icon there. So it's passing it over. So we just have to wait. There it goes. And it's now going through and converting my animation to an MP4 file. It's got 2 minutes remaining. I don't know why it's taking so long. It's not like, it's probably because of the filters I put on there, actually. Because the filters can be pretty intense. There it goes. Boom. All right. So it's uploaded, shared successfully. And let's go ahead and look in my browser. And gosh, look at that. Boom. So here's my Twitter account. And there's my little light bulb. Ah. It turns on just perfectly. Lovely. So there we go. I've successfully built a light bulb. Right on. Well, that is probably going to be it for this evening. I'm not quite set on the time yet. This is a weird little time. I do want to do these pretty much like, you know, at a certain time every week, but I don't know. This might be, I like to work late, but it might be a little late. I can see I've got 3 people on the stream right now, which I don't think is a whole lot. So maybe I'll play with times a little bit and see what else we can do that might be a little better for people watching live. I can imagine that you know, it's 10 o'clock, 10:19 right here in Colorado. So that's Mountain Time. And of course, we target Pacific Time because that's where Adobe HQ is, which they're an hour behind. So they are 9:19. And what do you think about the East Coast of the United States? They're 2 hours ahead of me in Mountain Time. So instead of 10:20, they're 12:20. So they're actually in the future. They're tomorrow right now. So they're probably all sleeping. So I don't know how smart it was to do this late at night. I like to do things late at night, but you know, we'll see what happens. All right. Anybody who is here, thank you for joining us live. Anybody who's seen the recording, thanks for watching the recording. Thank you, Sheridan. I appreciate that. And I'm going to stop the stream. So I will see everyone later.